Hi, I'm Liz Hampson, editor of Property Week, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Claudine Blamey, Head of Sustainability and Digital Strategy at climate crisis challenge partner Argent. As part of that challenge, Property Week and collaborating partner UK GBC have been calling on the property industry to sign up to the World GBC Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment. Meanwhile, the government has amplified its race to net zero carbon campaign ahead of COP26 this November in Glasgow, as it tries to drive engagement at a corporate level. But what do we really mean by net zero? Operational carbon? Embodied carbon? Both? Today, we're going to ask whether the term is fit for purpose, and if not, how we make it fit for purpose. Claudine, there seem to be multiple definitions of net zero, and they seem to be shifting all the time. Talk us through some of the definitions you've come across and what you make of them.
Hi Liz, I'd love to. So I think we're still in the early days. I think it's probably safe to say that we are still in the early days of the journey towards the more interim 2030 targets. And of course the 2050 targets. A lot of effort is being directed at providing solid foundations to develop net zero strategies and pathways, and that's fantastic. But there are a myriad of frameworks, and it's messy and confusing, with numerous organisations providing lots and lots of different definitions and frameworks. So, for example, there's the World GBC, there's National GBC Councils, there's the London Energy Transformation Initiative, LETI, International Living Future Institute, ILFI, Asset Owner Net Zero Alliance, Science-Based Targets, Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, the IIGCC, and that's not all of them, that's just a few. Also, majority of these frameworks, despite the significant effort that's going into developing them, are not always encompassing everything. So operational, embodied carbon, offsetting, which is all a part of a net zero carbon story. And I think, for us at Argent, for example, we're finding it quite difficult to understand which standard to go with, which framework to go with, which one's going to be the most robust, because that's what we really want to get to. We really want to make a difference. We really want to reduce our carbon and know that is basically going to contribute to what we need to do in this climate emergency. But it's very confusing. It's hard to find the right standard to go with. So we are actually going to use the UK GBC one because we're in the UK. But what's to say, that's not going to change in a couple of months' time.
And within those, obviously there are lots of different standards, and they are themselves being changed by the different organisations. So you mentioned, I think, Carbon Trust and obviously UK GBC. How have those standards changed?
So I think everyone's thinking keeps changing. There isn't really a standard as such at the moment. They're all sort of frameworks, and we end up with net zero pledges meaning different things and delivering different results and measuring different metrics, which means in the end, are we really going towards the direction we need to be going and fast enough at a pace? So the bigger picture assumption is that we need to reduce, I think, our energy consumption as much as possible in the journey to net zero carbon. And currently, we know that the world doesn't have enough renewable sources of energy to cater for that, the need that we have for energy at the moment, never mind the need going forward. So in reality, our demand for energy is going up. There have been studies, so for example, the Energy Information Administration, EIA, which is a US administration, says that nearly 50% increase in world energy usage between now and 2050. And that's led predominantly by what's happening in Asia. So we need to get to a point where we are investing in much faster growth of developing more renewable sources of energy, both those that are, working at the moment, we know that they work, but also we need a lot more money going into R&D, into ones we still need to develop and scale up from what is concepts at the moment into mainstream and large scale. So what I think is that in terms of the standards and the frameworks that are in place at the moment, haven't necessarily thought through the world need for all of these different bits of thinking that needs to be done in order for us to deliver on that. And therefore, having a UK based standard or a framework is fine, but actually that needs to marry up with a world framework that then helps us to maneuver around this whole concept, because climate change isn't just a UK thing, it's a worldwide issue.
So you'd like to see some sort of standardization?
Definitely. And I think it needs to be an agreed standard for our sector in particular. At world level, which is where COP26 becomes really important, and at then country levels as well.
And do you think it's possible to come up with a standard that's going to work across the globe?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. We've seen these sorts of standards being developed for other things in other areas, and why not here now for climate change and for carbon? I just don't think any of it. I mean, I suppose the best example we've got and closest we've got to this is the science-based targets. Science-based targets are driving us towards what we really need, which is the sort of getting towards 1.5 degree reductions to get to that. But yes, but we do definitely need that. We need an almost a kind of a BREEAM type or a LEED type thing that is accepted worldwide, and it's dated because our thinking will change over time. Of course it will. And so when you're following a particular standard, it might be the 2021 standard, and then things might change, and then you need to adopt the 2023 standard and so on.
I think that's a really great idea, that the dating of it, so that people understand that it needs to keep evolving, and that what you have in 2023, 24 is going to be quite a different standard to the one you had back in 2021. So with all of these different standards currently out there, what does that actually mean for you at Argent then? What impact is it having on you on a day-to-day basis as you're trying to sort of adapt your strategy accordingly ahead of COP26?
So it's difficult because, as I said, we've gone with following the UK GBC framework for net zero carbon. And even that, between last year and this year, there were changes. So you adopt something and then it changes, and you have to go back and make those changes within your own strategy. That means that it's not just Argent that's impacted, it's actually the whole supply chain. Because as we know, when you're developing a new building, it's the majority of the carbon is the embodied carbon. And the embodied carbon, as Argent, we don't really have control over. It's the supply chain, it's the people that deliver on producing and developing the materials. So that then becomes a chain reaction, and then you have to communicate that, you have to change things, you have to change your targets. And as I say, I think inevitably that will happen over time, because we'll see, we'll have new technology, we'll have new thinking, we'll be able to see best practice from maybe other parts of the world that we want to adopt. But I think we need something in place now as a standard as opposed to a framework. And then we can change that over time on an agreed basis. A bit like we do BREEAM. I think that's a really good example.
Well, that's a really good distinction as well to draw between a standard and a framework, that we sort of need to move towards the standard position. So you talked a little bit about what the best way forward is. You've also alluded to the differences between kind of operational carbon and embodied carbon. What about the idea that we could decouple energy consumption from carbon emissions. Is that possible? Is that desirable? Should we be aspiring to that?
So I think in a world where we've got rid of all carbon, we're not using carbon anymore, we're still going to be aspiring to build buildings that are very energy efficient, because that's never going to go away. And as I said, it is very difficult to say we're not going to focus on energy efficiency as such, and we're just going to get rid of carbon. So you know, today, if you have a portfolio and or an estate like King's Cross, and you might have all the energy that's coming to that estate is coming from green sources, so there is no carbon entering. Could you say that that's a net zero carbon estate? Current standards and frameworks are saying that you need to deliver against certain energy efficiency in the buildings to be able to say that you're a net zero carbon estate. And I completely understand why we're saying that. To my point at the beginning, which is around we don't actually have enough renewable sources to be able to deliver that. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I do think it's important to have the energy efficiency element to net zero carbon. But the energy efficiency element is going to go on forever. We have to deliver energy efficient buildings because it's good design. It's good quality design to be able to do that. What I would say is that the government has obviously put lots of legislation around energy efficiency and buildings through Part L and many, many different standards to do that. What we haven't tackled is the embodied carbon element. And I do think there needs to be some sort of legislation coming in to be able to take that into account as well in terms of building development. And
what kind of, what would you want to see in that legislation then? What would that look like?
Well, I think we need to get to some targets around the legislation. There are some targets that have been developed as part of frameworks around embodied carbon of buildings, both residential and commercial buildings. So I think we just need to see a level playing field in that, and we need to see that sort of starting to be legislated and regulated.
And a lot of the focus, I guess, and it seems to be easier to look at what needs to happen with new builds. The great problem, of course, is the existing stock there and what you need to do to sort of retrofit that and make it fit for purpose and sort of be part of this journey. What are the priorities with existing stock from your point of view?
So obviously existing stock, it's very difficult to deal with the embodied carbon. So I would say there it is all about energy efficiency. And again, there's some great targets out there that we need to get to that net zero carbon place that we want to be by 2050. So again, if the government can start thinking about how to incentivize that to happen, because obviously it's a very costly exercise for a lot of existing buildings. Having said that, the finance sector is really starting to focus on net zero carbon buildings and for their funds to be net zero carbon and therefore those assets to be net zero carbon. So actually that's going to, I think, really drive this forward now, which is great news. It's what we've been hoping for a long, long time, and it's here now. So I think that will drive that. So there are lots of green bonds out there, green loans available for doing that type of thing, which is exactly what we need to be pumping finances into. So that's that. But then the embodied carbon piece, I think we could deal with that in the sense that this is where offsetting could come in. This is where offsetting will mean something, in the sense that more money does need to be pumped into this sector and in the sense of reducing carbon emissions. So if it's going to a project that is going to reduce carbon emissions, wouldn't have otherwise have done that through this offsetting finance, then great. I think that's fantastic. It means that we'll get to our targets quicker and we'll be dealing with climate change quicker.
Offsetting is so often seen as a bit of a dirty word, isn't it? And a bit of a cop-out. But I think you're saying it's a critical part of the mix, but it shouldn't be a default position.
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely not a default position. It has a place in net zero carbon journey. You've got to obviously, you've got to reduce your emissions in the first instance. You've got to have renewables to do that. And then the little bit that you can't do anything else about, I think can be offset. And as I said, there are fantastic offsetting projects that really need some financing to get off the ground and bring the carbon emissions down in those parts of the world. Then it's a fantastic thing to do.
So what we're seeing is a lot more alignment now across the industry and beyond in terms of understanding the importance of net zero carbon. From what you've said today, there clearly needs to be a bit more standardization going on, because otherwise some of these aspirations are going to be quite, quick. They're going to be thwarted, aren't they? So what happens from your point of view if that standardization doesn't occur and we don't get all of these myriad standards coming up with a common viewpoint to match the aspirations in the industry now? What are the ramifications for Argent and the wider property industry?
I think widely we will end up with what we have now, which is sort of different frameworks, no agreed standard, and we don't know what we're really working towards. So we'll know, we won't necessarily know what we are reducing, and what we're reducing is actually contributing to combating climate change, which is the ultimate. That's where we need to get to. By every carbon that we save, every carbon that we reduce, then that needs to be showing that that's doing something to get us to the big Paris Agreement target. And I just don't think we can do that at the moment.
And do you fear also an element of greenwash creeping in?
I wouldn't say that about some of the pledges that we've seen come from our sector. I think they're all pretty robust. So I think everyone's really trying hard. But I just think it would be fantastic if we did all get together and agree this standard. I know UK GBC are working towards developing a standard, which is fantastic. But what I don't know is how does that marry up with something that might happen globally. The World GBC has a framework, they've set out a framework, but that's not a standard, that's a framework which you can follow or not follow.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there is such a big difference, and the standard is what we're after, isn't it, here? So in the meantime, hopefully these discussions are underway and progress will be made. But what else needs to happen ahead of COP26 in your view? And what will your priorities be ahead of that event in November?
Yeah, so I think it would be great if we can come together as a sector and really start working on this. I don't think we'll have a conclusion by COP26. Well, that is if it happens this year. So start working on linking and bringing together the multiple approaches and standards. And as I said, I know UK GBC are doing some work around this. So it would be fantastic to really get that going a bit faster maybe. But I think we really need to remember that the bigger picture is to deliver on the Paris Agreement goal, to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. And of course, preferably 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. So the bigger picture is the actual, the difference that we'll make between that 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. And that's huge. So the risk of not doing this is massive. It means that, 3 times the people exposed to extreme heat waves at higher temperatures than if we were getting to 1.5 degrees, and a massive 170% increase in flood risks compared to today if we are at the 2 degrees warming level. So I would say ultimately we need an agreed international standard for net zero carbon for our sector to really be able to drive all this forward and make it happen in the right way.
And how optimistic are you that we will achieve that goal?
I don't think we've got a choice. I think we really do need to achieve that goal. Maybe it starts with the UK GBC standard development, but I think then we need to really lobby to get this adopted worldwide. It may be that the investors might push us to do that, or the investors might come up with a standard that they need the whole sector to follow. But I do think it does need to happen, and there isn't really a choice that we have to do it.
Listen, thanks ever so much, Claudine. That was really, really insightful. Clearly, this journey towards net zero is not quite as straightforward as it seems, not least because at the moment there are so many different definitions of what net zero actually is. On the plus side, as our recent perception survey showed, people are more aware of the importance of net zero. Now we just need to ensure they actually understand what it is and they're on the same page in terms of this drive towards a common standard, and I think that will unlock a lot of this for the industry and help us actually reach that goal of net zero carbon. But thanks ever so much, Claudine, for your time there. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Liz.